All right, good evening and welcome to the City of Carpinteria General Plan Update Committee meeting for October 20th, 2025. I don't know, we're calling the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Council member and chair of the committee, Clark.
Here.
Vice Mayor Solarsino.
Here.
Commissioner Benefield. Here. Commissioner Van Antwerp.
Here.
All are present.
Okay, and this afternoon we're going to review comments made by the Coastal Commission for the draft general plan.
Correct.
And are we going to do anything else?
Would you like to take off agenda comments first? See if the public has any. That is the only item tonight is the Coastal Commission comments.
Okay.
But
all right. So then we'll open the public hearing for items not on the agenda tonight.
Okay, good.
We don't have enough time for all the items not on the agenda.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. It's like when I go to the store. Did you find everything?
No. Store?
Okay, are anybody on Zoom?
There are no raised hands on Zoom for any. We do have one raised hand. Amrita Salm. All right, go ahead, Amrita.
Good evening. This is a comment for the community, our development department, because you are so instrumental in providing information. I was wondering if it's something that you could consider including in your staff reports to help the decision makers to try to show both sides of an issue. You're explaining something about a project and all you're doing is giving all the positive things about that project, about that particular issue. But are there ever any minuses to that issue that should be considered? And I think it would be very useful for the decision makers and the public to have both sides shown in the staff reports when possible. It's something I just like the department or the city council or whoever to consider as an option of providing the most thorough information. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. It's an important one. Anybody else?
There are no other raised hands on Zoom during future public comments. If you'd like to make a public comment, just use the raise hand function on Zoom. Thanks.
Can I ask a follow-up question to staff? Yeah. Just for clarification, can you explain, is that staff, what's staff's approach to making staff reports? Is it practice to provide one perspective, or does staff attempt to have more of a balance? Because I know in my experience of reading staff reports, there is much more of a balance. It doesn't seem like staff are trying to make any arguments. It seems like they're trying to present information within the context of the local regulations and policies. But I just want to give staff the opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Sometimes it really does kind of depend on the item and the issue. Sometimes it's incumbent on us to make our recommendation very clear, and to also at least provide the legal boundaries that are in front of the decision makers. But I do think the commenter brings up a very good point, and when there are multiple sides to an issue, we really do want to make that real clear in our staff reports. So I think that's good food for thought as we go forward.
No, I appreciate that, because I think it is important for the public to know that part of the city staff approach to these topics is not to come to the table with minds made up and trying to convince the decision makers. But like you said, I understand that sometimes there is a recommendation, but I appreciate that it's more of an informational presentation for then the decision makers to discuss amongst ourselves. So I just want to make sure the public understands that really important part of the process.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And if there's no other comments on that, we'll proceed with the agenda.
Great, thank you. So our agenda tonight is to summarize the key comments we received from the Coastal Commission staff on our draft plan. We will try to summarize them briefly in this presentation. We'll get through as much as we can, and then we'll allow time for public comments. We are not going to call out everything that was in the staff memo, but we do have the staff memo ready to pull up if there's anything that you flagged that we did not touch on. And so with that, I will, again, to summarize, these are the elements of the draft plan that were commented on that we'll highlight. And again, we will pull up the memo if need be. So I'll start off with the glossary comments. There were a lot of, as you probably saw in the staff memo, there were a lot of definitions that were revised and a couple that were added. And this is the only slide that I created for specific discussion. In particular, the definition of public viewshed was recommended to be changed to public view, with the definition that it's a geographical area containing broad views of a scenic area such as the coast, ocean, waterways, beaches, wetlands, mountains, and parklands as viewed from a public viewpoint, including a public roadway, trail, beach, and park. And that was one that we discussed extensively with Coastal Commission in our follow-up meetings also. And so this was actually a middle ground one that we came to collaborate on together. So we think that it's a good change overall, but we're definitely open to any other input from you or the public. They also had revisions to light pollution, stating that it would be defined as the presence of artificial light that negatively alters the natural patterns of light and dark in the ecosystems, etc. And then they added to the visual resources definition specific examples that within the city it would include one of the those of the Carpinteria bluffs consisting of both long, e.g. mountain, foothill, ocean, horizon, and short, such as natural open space, beach, windrows, native grasslands, coastal scrub, and coastal bluffs, range views. And so that is the highlights of the glossary. And please feel free to stop me at any point, but I can also come back to these slides during questions and deliberations.
So we break for a little comments on this?
Your questions, is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Questions, comments.
Certainly.
Great. So first of all, I appreciate that city staff drafted this glossary. I know Coastal Commission made some edits to it, but it was really great to have that glossary there to begin with. I wanted to ask, were any of the edits that Coastal Commission made, does that change anything in terms of future development conditions or current permitting process? In other words, was there anything that was big enough of a change to make a difference?
The only one, Vice Mayor, was the public viewshed change, but like I said, we did work with them and collaborated, and then we went back through and checked all the instances of public viewshed as well as public views, and we think that this still gets at what we were striving for. The other changes were just really a lot more specific, but I don't think it changed what we were driving at with our objectives and our policies.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So I'm curious about the viewshed and you know, what was their argument, or
It was basically
what was their initial thing if this is a compromise?
Councilmember Clark. It was they had left out the broad views in there, and they had it more specific to like a geographical area type, and so that was the collaboration back and forth where we wanted to say broad views. We actually originally had unobstructed broad views, and we thought that unobstructed was important, but they took out unobstructed in their recommendation. And if your committee, I don't know if your committee would prefer to have that word in there or not. A lot of it is kind of just wordsmithing, though.
Okay. Anybody,
Yeah. Well, I definitely like that we call it, where is it? Did we say public view, or public view shed? Which one are we using? Public
So
view.
we had view shed, and they want it to just be public
Okay,
view.
think public view is broader and just doesn't rely on someone's view, but a few people's view. It's a little broader, and things will get in the way of views. I mean, who knows? You might need a tower or something. I don't know, but we always seem to want to tighten everything down so that when something new comes along, we have to say, oh, no, doesn't apply. So I like to leave openings, but I also like the new definition. I also think that they took our report and added 4,000 more words, and it says the same thing, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So I would like to keep this view definition the way it is, the way they have suggested. There you
Yeah,
go.
I
Tried
think
to say that.
if it's obstructed, it's not a view anymore, so.
Well, what if you
So, I
had
mean,
to put
I
a,
think, I mean, I guess I agree with what they're saying, is that, why have unobstructed in there then, because you don't have a view anymore if it's obstructed.
Understood.
well,
There's not a view.
And one other thing I can add just for context is that simplifying it to public view was also just a consistency thing. The phrase public view and the phrase public view shed were both used in the draft, and I think they picked up on that inconsistency, and so this was also just a simplification to just use the same word each time.
it gets kind of cute with view shed. Why don't we just say view?
I did notice one other place in here, outside of the glossary. I'll never find it now. Anyway, it still uses the word view shed.
Oh,
In,
strike that.
CD8, 6A,
Oh, where's that?
which is
Okay.
where, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll admit that we haven't made those
Yeah,
changes.
it's on the top of page 5.
Okay. Thank you. Now that I mean, assuming that we have consensus on the new definition, we will make that change throughout. All right, in the land use element, there were only really 3 key things. One was they had recommended adding a takings policy in one of the in one of the other elements. And when we met with them, we suggested having that takings policy just put up front in the land use element. And they agreed, and we already have a takings policy in our creeks preservation program. It's extensively long. It's a couple of pages. That's why we didn't cut and paste it. But we can work with our city attorney on making sure that we have a good updated takings policy up front in the land use element. And then they recommended adding to 1E, protecting coastal areas, adding the addition of upland areas necessary to support coastal recreational uses should be reserved for such uses where feasible. And then a new policy, likely to be 3B. The city should reduce the density or intensity of development on a particular parcel if conditions such as topography, et cetera, make existing or proposed development a threat to public health or safety. And that was really it for the pertinent parts of the land use element.
Question about the takings policy.
Yes.
So how do you envision, you'll continue to work with the Coastal Commission to actually come up with one?
Well,
Can you-
that's
There's already one that we have, I understand.
correct. Yeah. Yeah, Commissioner Van Antwerp, we'd rather just at this point work with our city attorneys. We told the Coastal Commission staff that we would do that, and they were fine with that. So they did not need to see this again in terms of the specific language.
Okay, but it will be in this element.
Yes.
And question, is it intended to solve for the city the issues primarily about the Chevron and the bluffs? Or is it more of a broader citywide issue?
Thank you. Yes, it's a broader citywide issue, really, to have anytime any of our policies would result in a potential takings of land where they couldn't have feasible economic use of their property. And that could be any property that is constrained and that our policies continue to prohibit any feasible use under the zone. Then we would need a disclaimer saying that they would then be allowed to do the minimal feasible economic reasonable use.
Is sea level rise also one of the reasons why the Coastal Commission is suggesting this? I mean, if you could give us an
Yes.
idea of what the Coastal Commission is thinking when they brought this forward.
Yes, sea level rise, ESHA, slopes, could be even, it could even be a seismic activity. Yeah. As long as health and safety could still be met in some way, then development would be allowed.
Okay, the other question about that, I noticed in the, our current takings policy in the implementation measure 2.1.6, it talks about minimum necessary development. So I think that's in the current version, that's the one for the creeks, right?
Correct, yes. I have it in a slide here.
I looked at that, and that was the thing that kind of leapt out at me is, I'm sure you guys will be discussing it. I'm sure it'll go through, extensive reviews, but that one would need to be clearly defined, I think.
Say again, the
phrase.
minimum necessary, yes.
It's minimum necessary development.
Correct.
And let's see, it's in, under the exact language of implementation. Yeah, I'd have to find the exact piece of it, but it's the use proposed by the applicant is consistent with the applicable zoning, and then the use and project design, siting, and size are the minimum necessary to provide the applicant with an economically viable use of the premises.
Yeah, 2D right here.
I just took bits and pieces
Yep.
from that. I didn't print off the whole thing because, yeah, I'm not going to.
Yes, and there's been so much case law about what is considered, reasonable economic use. So we would definitely be using the latest and greatest and working with our legal team to craft that.
Yeah, I think if we're going to put it into that element, that's going to be huge because of some of the issues that are facing us with erosion and sea level rise, things like that. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'll go on to our community design element. There were a number of small revisions, But regarding the bluffs in particular, the Coastal Commission staff recommended some changes that would use action words here, and in 8.6D also recommended removing framing and softening the appearance of buildings, but stuck with the action words that landscaping shall enhance, integrate the built environment with its natural surroundings, utilize native vegetation. So it's some small wordsmithing there. And then they also made some changes to our lighting policy. They recommend taking out 6B, which was particularly for commercial development, and they believe that it's all captured here in 6A. Lighting shall be low intensity to provide the minimum lighting necessary to ensure safety and shall incorporate design measures such as shielding and downward direction to reduce adverse impacts to night sky, ESHA, and wetlands. So we're generally okay with this change. However, the extra design policy that commercial development lighting should be designed to complement the building, they took that out. I'm not quite sure why. And so just wanted to ensure that that looked okay to the committee, or if there were any questions or comments either about the bluffs design or the lighting design policies.
What does it mean if exterior lighting would not be designed to complement the building? Is that the sense that it would maybe be, do they mean complement it architecturally or aesthetically? What are, I don't quite understand that.
I mean, that was our policy, which was, it was a subjective policy, but basically stating that commercial lighting should complement, the kind of setting. So when you think, I often think of Linden Square now as our newest, and the lighting there, it has that great feel of the patio and the string lights. And so I think just ensuring that there's some guidance on commercial lighting, but their argument is that it's all pretty much covered here in 6A, which is also fine. These are subjective design standards.
I do like the idea of the commercial development and that integration being called out specifically. It seems like, especially if we're talking about new developments, that would be important for us to have some say over that, or be able to have some feedback into that.
Excellent. That's good input. And that could be left outside, it could, I'm not sure if it'll be part of the LCP or not, but that'll be another thing that we'll go back and talk to them about.
But there will still be design guidelines through the ARB. That objective design standards, ARB review.
The only objective design standards we have at the moment is for our housing rezones. And that was created specifically for currently just the 8 sites that were rezoned to allow for ministerial permitting there for housing. But all other types of development still, even if they go through ARB, they either have design guidelines for their neighborhood per the community design element, or they have subjective design standards. Or zoning.
The ARB used to have design guidelines.
In the zoning ordinance, right?
No, the design guidelines that, there's one for the beach neighborhood, there's one for like the
No,
northwest
but there
neighborhood.
was one even before anybody had the concept of neighborhoods. I guess that's fallen by the wayside.
I'm not entirely familiar with the one that you may be referencing, but I do know that our 3 current set of community design guidelines are still active, and our ARB does still use them to review projects.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we preserve both the environmental quality as well as the downtown area, Linden, that character. Otherwise, I think it's fine.
Excellent, thank you. All right, 3 highlights from the circulation element. One is a new policy stating that new or major redevelopment projects shall include features that support alternative transportation and reduce VMT. And that's very consistent with what we were already trying to achieve in the circulation element. One that we're still working on is we have a draft policy in the element requiring that certain commercial projects with a CUP have to do trip reduction plans to reduce VMT. But Coastal Commission suggested that that be changed to any non-residential coastal development permits, which would actually be overly broad. It would be any commercial project that was just adding an outdoor patio or something like that. So we want to come up with a good compromise, a middle ground that would require new and major redevelopment projects that are discretionary to do trip reduction plans, and especially if they're near the beach area. And so we're going to continue to work with our consultants on that policy. And then they also recommend that we add another stronger policy to the circulation element that would protect parking for public coastal access. And we're going to work with our consultants as well as our legal team on how to have that strong policy, yet make sure it doesn't conflict with the recent state laws about commercial development near a transit stop, which is AB 2097, which, except for hotels, would exempt commercial development from having to provide all the parking.
I can ask a question about that. So then when Coastal Commission gives that type of feedback, I mean, they know that AB 2097 exists. So how do they address that tension when they're making these types of recommendations to cities?
Well, they did provide some guidance. Megan, did you want to summarize their memo on that one?
Sure. Yeah, a couple of years ago, after AB 2097 took effect, the Coastal Commission did issue sort of a guidance memo to local jurisdictions, basically acknowledging that AB 2097 would have an impact on the availability of parking in coastal areas. And they provided some suggestions of how cities could go about mitigating that. Obviously promoting public transit, alternative transit like biking, walking, skateboarding, all of that sort of thing. And some of those same trip reduction plans, that kind of policy is another thing that they suggested. So if you're going to have a new establishment coming in an area but not providing any parking, what else could that establishment do to potentially reduce the amount of vehicles that would be arriving at it? So again, just a guidance memo. They did say, though, this does conflict with some of our Coastal Act priorities in providing access to the coast.
Just seems like that's another one of those examples where the cities are getting mandates from different entities that are in direct conflict with each other, and it makes it a lot harder for the cities to be in alignment with all these different policies. But in terms of the VMT, so it sounds like that's something the city, like you mentioned, the city is already folding that into our approach to this. What does that look like? What is a VMT reduction requirement? What does that look like in terms of enforcement, or what ultimately people would see in terms of that implementation?
Great question. It would first it would only be something that we would condition development permits for, and it would probably be in working with the applicants on what they could do to reduce VMT. Oftentimes, it's adding bicycle parking, making things very walkable and accessible, adding, if at all possible, making it transit-oriented if there's any way to make it more attainable to bus riders or train riders. But in some cases, people still need vehicle access, so it's finding that balance.
Got it, thank you.
What about size of the project?
Commissioner Van Antwerp, that can also be something that we work with the applicant on, but it gets, it starts to get into that gray area of, especially if it's residential, can we reduce housing? Probably not. I think mostly we're talking about commercial in this instance. So the size of the commercial, are we still making it economically feasible? Is it still proportional to what they're proposing? It certainly is part of the conversation, though, I would think.
Yeah, I just am thinking of the smaller development projects that it's really going to burden those folks. So that's all.
Another aspect would be if it's to reduce the employee trips, it could be finding ways to have shuttles that help commuters get to work.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I think we need to do it. I'm just wondering how we're going to actually enact the policy. So, yeah, thank you.
Does any of this work? Because we've had these guidelines in place for a real long time for for project approvals, and it just doesn't strike me as a thundering herd of people following these ideas. And now we're tearing our communities apart, trying to get parking for the housing we need, but oh, wait, no parking for that housing, but parking for this housing. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, but it makes it really hard for small towns. Do you know of any projects in town that employ these transit-reducing mechanisms that work?
Commissioner Benefield, I think only the larger job centers such as Procore and LinkedIn have those kinds of programs, and I think it is to reimburse people for transit.
Good.
But no, you bring up a good point, and the world is constantly changing, right? We're getting now into driverless vehicles, and what does that mean for VMT? Is it going to increase, or is it in the long run going to decrease? So we just don't know, and so we're going to keep trying, though, and it is a statewide goal, even of the Coastal Commission, to reduce VMT. I think the question is just how do we do that in a smart way?
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
That's why you get the big bucks, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I have a few slides on the open space conservation element. 2 new policies are recommended by Coastal. ESHA shall be protected against any significant disruption of habitat values, and only uses dependent upon those resources shall be allowed within those areas. And then protect, maintain, and where feasible, restore biological productivity and quality of coastal waters, creeks, wetlands, estuaries, lakes, and marine resources. These were in our earlier drafts of the general plan update, but at some point had come out, and the Coastal wants us to put them back in. We could do that, or if not in the proposed project, we could certainly do it in a reduced alternative that would be more protective, and then it would be an option for the decision makers in the long run. The staff also recommend having an objective buffer from ESHA areas, and they pointed out the city of Santa Barbara. So City of Santa Barbara buffer has 100 feet from butterfly aggregation sites, 50 feet from perennial grasslands, native grasslands, I should say, 50 feet from oak woodland, and 25 feet from upland scrub. And this is a very reasonable and feasible objective buffer that we could add either to the proposed project or to a reduced alternative, or as a mitigation measure as we move forward with our EIR.
If we wanted to include it as a reduced alternative, what would we have to do as part of this process?
I think just let us know that you're interested in having that analysis of
Okay.
what would it look like with a buffer and without a buffer, and that would make our jobs easier in the EIR because it would make for a good compare and contrast. And also, like right now, we know that there's a strong push to have buffers, but again, the state law keeps changing over time. And so if we start off with a strong objective ESHA buffers, and then that is no longer a coastal commission objective when the plan gets adopted, it would be good to have the compare and contrast to choose from.
I think that would be the way to go, definitely.
Yeah,
Right.
overall, I agree with the coastal commission. I think we should have something objective.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I agree
And
too.
it should not be an alternative in the EIR, but it should be what we do.
Okay.
Well, okay, but we were talking about it as potentially as a reduced alternative, because then that would, if it ends up getting, the issue ends up getting impacted by additional state laws, or if it ends up not being a priority, you were saying for coastal commission in the same way, if we have it as a reduced alternative, that gives us more.
It would, but we could also make it like a mitigation measure that gets analyzed in the EIR either way. So that way it can be chosen to be adopted by the decision makers or not chosen to be adopted. And again, that way we would still have that flexibility at the time that it is adopted. So hearing from your committee, it sounds like there is a preference for it. We know that there's a preference for it from Coastal Commission. So we can, instead of having it be an immediate part of the project, it could be something we add in as a mitigation measure to reduce impacts in the EIR.
Yeah, just
And
give.
then you'll
right.
still have that compare contrast.
And I like that just because so much state law is changing so quickly that I wouldn't want to see us have any less options than we already do, and getting more boxed in feels like that would not help us to achieve what we want, which is exactly to have those types of buffers in place.
So if we had a buffer that was 100, but then there's a new state law that said it had to be 50, then do we all go to jail, or what do we do?
No, as decision makers, you would still be able to do the 100-foot. You would still have discretion. We just want to, for all we know, there will be new pressures to have even more housing or something, and we just want to tee you up to have that ability to make that decision.
It's just been my casual observation that decision makers, when they don't have something definitive, they go for the least possible, and so you get your standard gets watered down in the actual process of the development review. Maybe Jane has any thoughts on that.
I think it just depends on what it is, though, but ASHA seems pretty important.
Yeah. And to be clear, I mean as decision makers adopting the general plan, not necessarily as decision makers on individual projects, which you bring up a good point. That does tend to be the issue when individual projects come forward. If you don't already have a protective policy that you can point to, you don't feel like you can require more open space. But I'm purely thinking of when we take the general plan update forward for adoption and ask you to make those hard decisions about policies like this. We just want to make sure that we haven't boxed you in with the environmental review by starting off by being too protective. We want all these protective policies to be in there somewhere, but we also want to give you ability to say, well, we want a little bit less, or we want to meet in the middle.
I agree with that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's really good feedback. I have one more open space slide on visual resources. 2 new policies are recommended by coastal staff to protect visual resources. And I think this might have been the one that you pointed out that had public views in it. So a site-specific visual evaluation shall be required for development that has the potential to impact scenic resources or public scenic views. And that is not an issue for us. We would require that anyway in order to ensure that coastal visual views are not impacted. And so we thought that was a good new policy. And then development should be cited to and designed to be visually compatible with the character of surrounding areas where appropriate, protect unique characteristics of areas that are popular visitor destination points or recreational uses. And we welcome your input on that, but we thought those were fine recommendations from Coastal.
For the visual evaluation, is that its own independent process? Is that something that the city would contract out with somebody to do, or what does that visual evaluation look like?
We would ask the applicant to submit, to hire a consultant
Got
and
it,
submit
okay.
the analysis, and then we would review it, or possibly even, if needed, hire a consultant for peer review of it. But it is very common to, especially where there's protected coastal views, it's very common to require a visual study.
Or do we have any that are going on right now for projects, or maybe for recent projects?
Yes, we do. For the housing project on the Bluffs is going to be submitting one. And the Surfliner EIR has a visual resource section. I think anytime we have a cell site, we usually ask for some kind of visual study to see if they can stealth their cell site and make it not so intrusive into the visual environment.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Maybe even something, for example, let's say 18-story building.
Yeah,
Certainly.
a lot of landscaping.
How did I forget that one? All right, for the safety element, they recommended 2 new policies. One regarding any active fault for seismic hazards, to have a 50-foot setback or even more, depending on any safety potential issues related to that. And then another new policy to encourage that new or major redevelopment implement pest management strategies that reduce the use of pesticides. As a city, we cannot regulate pesticide use, but we can do more to encourage projects to use other methods of reducing pests. And then they also recommended that we clarify our definition of bluff edge and, if possible, provide an objective buffer or setback from the bluff edge. And so we are working on examples. They pointed to one in Malibu that we could use that has kind of a starting objective setback from bluff edge, but then says you can encroach into that buffer on certain circumstances. And so we're looking closely at that, and we'll work with coastal staff on having a buffer from bluff edge. And I think that was it for safety.
Actually, I have a question on the pesticide use language.
Certainly.
Was there any discussion about okay, or why wouldn't, instead of the city shall encourage new development, can you explain why we couldn't put require?
I can to some extent, because I did look into this issue, and as a city, we cannot prohibit people from using pesticides if it's something they need to use. This tends to be very controversial in the agriculture world. So if active agriculture is using pesticides, they get permits from the ag commissioner, and then there are also state agencies that permit it. And so we cannot stop someone from being able to use it, but we can do more to educate people, to encourage that they use alternative forms rather than the kinds of herbicides and pesticides that can be harmful to the natural environment. And so there's a lot we can do, but we cannot outright prohibit the use.
We can limit the height, but not the poison.
Right.
Kind of strange to me.
And then before I dive into public facilities and healthy community, we did have a lot of detailed conversation with coastal staff because they thought most of the healthy community element was redundant with the public facilities element. And so I pulled this slide back out from what we presented last year when we brought these elements forward, just to clarify again why the two are very similar yet different. And so when I think of the public facilities and services, I tend to think of the things that are directly under agency control. It means for city facilities and services, things that our city council budgets for, the things that we own, the things that we are providing to the community and the public in the form of parks and roads and services such as public works, road maintenance, all of those kinds of things. Also, fire department providing services and water department. So that's the kind of things where we have policies about how to manage those facilities and services in that element. But in the healthy community element, it's meant to talk more about how we make those things equitable for everyone, how we encourage people to get out and use the trails and to access healthy food. And so that's kind of the difference between the two. But when you look at the policies, a lot of times you're thinking, wow, these are very similar. It could be just a couple words difference, but it's that difference that makes it go from being a policy about us providing a trail and a policy about encouraging people to use that trail. And so we explained that to Coastal Commission. They were fine with that once we explained it, and they said, okay, just make that very clear. And they pointed out some that weren't that clear, and so that's really helping us. So we're going back and making sure that we don't have that kind of confusion when these are, when the next draft comes out.
Could I say something about that?
Certainly.
Well, the bottom part is a process, is a way to do things and things. The top part of this public facilities are concrete changes to the land and neighborhood, but this is more of a esoteric thing.
And that was our intent. Our intent was that the public facilities element is really talking about those concrete things that we provide, and by we, all the agencies in the city, and that the other healthy community element is really about when you look at those facilities, are you making them ADA accessible? Are you making sure that you're thinking of everybody? So it could still talk a little bit about the things we provide, or it could talk about a program that we're going to do to make those things more accessible. But they should still be two distinct things, and so we're going to work on making sure that's really clear going forward. But that said, they had a recommendation for 2 new policies that would prevent more waste and reduce single-use plastics. And so we thought those were reasonable new policies. Continue to implement single-use plastic restrictions and prohibitions in a manner that is more environmentally friendly than state law. And monitor and maintain public trash and recycling receptacles to prevent litter from getting into the environment.
You're not doing a very good job of that. Recycling, doing the plastic bags are everywhere again. And, I mean, how are we going to implement some of these very useful ideas when we just put them on paper and then we say, somebody should take care of that? We've really got to start thinking about who's going to enforce it, monitor it, and make it happen so it becomes habit. It just galls me, and it isn't just me. Everybody says, well, we have trash can. One side says litter, one side says, landfill, and yet the bag is the same bag for all the trash. So I just think we could do better, and that's just, sorry, a complaint. I'll stop.
We can always do better, and I know we have our division in Public Works, Environmental Sustainability, and they are working real hard to educate people, but it's kind of a long game, right, of really getting out, yes. So at some point, though, there needs to be more of a stick and less of a carrot to make it work.
Any stick,
Yeah.
twig. Thank you, I'm sorry. It's not your fault.
They also recommended 2 new implementation actions, stating that our open space master program requires projects on the bluffs to dedicate and construct a portion of the bluff trail. And when a bluff property is developed, a funding program or maintenance of recreational areas should be developed by either forming a new assessment district or revising the existing city parks maintenance fund to include contributions. So this would be an implementation action. It wouldn't bind anyone, but it would be something for us to consider going forward if that trail is going to get developed and then maintained. Can we create a program to ensure that funding could occur for that?
Can I ask, how many parcels would that apply to realistically in terms of what could be developed on the bluffs and what we don't want to necessarily be developed on the bluffs? I mean,
Right.
what number of parcels does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, there would only be a few to ensure the completion of that, unless you think of, every possible future change to the bluffs that could happen. So it feels a little late in the game to put this up here because we don't have a blank canvas with the
Right.
bluffs, and then to be able to say that everything that happens in the future will then contribute to that trail. But it also, to put it in there and say, this is what we're striving for, also wouldn't necessarily hurt because it wouldn't bind us.
Right, okay.
It's just something that we could continue to see if it would be feasible.
Tell me again why we wouldn't want to do it.
We would want to, however, most of the bluffs is either already preserved, already has the trail, or already developed and has some kind of trail easement or partial trail dedication. So it's just that it's not that we don't want it, it's just that it's not very realistic to think that this could come to fruition, starting a maintenance assessment district where you might only have 2 parcels left to make it work and a couple of contributors is, it's just not very likely within the next couple decades. But again, why not strive for it, right? If it's not going to be a condition on anything, but it's going to be a action that we as a city would like to make happen, then we can put it in and we can keep working toward it and see maybe it will work. Maybe the pieces will fall into place.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of having it in there, and that was what I had meant by asking my question was, I wasn't sure if some of the ideas they proposed, like a new assessment district, or I mean, they had a couple of other ones. It seemed like that'd be a lot of work for the city to do in order for, like you said, what is essentially, you know, two parcels or so. So, but I still, to your point though, I think it's really important to have the language there, because that signals what we value and what we want to be top of mind when those parcels, however they do move forward. So, but I just think it is kind of interesting that, like you said, it's almost like the horse has left the barn. You're closing the barn door, the horse is long gone, but yeah.
That's what I was thinking too, because it says should be instead of shall be. So it's sort of like, well, yeah, I echo Monica's sentiment.
Yeah. And then the other action, again, implementation action means something that we would strive for if we can make it all work, is continue to update and collect park impact fees and to try and achieve a minimum level of service of 3 acres per 1,000 people of parkland. And that is something that we are already striving for and can continue to do so with this kind of implementation action.
Do we still have Quimby fees?
We do, but they only apply to subdivisions, and that's why it doesn't come up that often. We don't get that many subdivisions. But whenever you subdivide land, you have to provide Quimby fees to go toward parkland.
Yeah, can you explain that, what the three, I'm not familiar with it, and probably a lot of people aren't, but it's 3 acres per 1,000 residents.
Okay.
As
But we
a,
could go up.
as a minimum. So
Would it
I'm
make
sorry,
any
we do
sense?
have a policy there's a policy in the same element in the chapter right above these implementation actions that is to achieve 10 acres per 1,000 people. Is that correct, Megan?
I can pull it up really quick, but it would provide more parkland than what is currently displayed on the screen there. But if you give me 1 second, I can pull it up.
But Coastal recommends that the implementation action, which again applies to the city in trying to make all the funding work, is to maintain a minimum of 3 acres per 1,000. So it's setting that minimum, whereas we have another policy that's striving for 10 acres per 1,000. Right now, we're at about 9 acres per 1,000 when you look at how much parkland we have per capita. So, yeah, the Coastal Commission, they want to ensure that we continue to have coastal recreation and that we continue to try and apply parkland with all the new development.
I can jump in here really
there
quick to add that policy if you'd like. It's in more of the background section of the Public Facilities and Services, but the National Recreation and Parks Association, for agencies that have fewer than 20,000 residents, they recommend 13 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents, but again, that's just a recommendation. It's not a requirement, and that is a significant amount. Right now, as Mindy said, we're around 9 or 10 acres per 1,000 residents. So we're doing well right now.
That's a curious number. Do we, I'm sorry, I'm just so used to not taking my turn. Different communities would need different park amounts. For instance, high density, say Detroit, and we are going to use the same figures for all these different developments, or shouldn't they be tailored to the type of city and density and intensity of use?
That's a good point, and we do that in the zoning ordinance as well as in like specific developments. So for instance, the you all have seen the Lagunitas 2 development a couple times in concept review, and how they're going to have recreational facilities to go with the new density that they're proposing. But this is meant to be like, yeah, very general. So it doesn't get into like what, which neighborhood and how much density and all that. This is just meant to be very,
Be aware.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, it just, a dumb number.
There were a lot of other comments in the public facilities element. So I'm just going to quickly summarize them in bullet points. They recommend adding 2 policies that were in our open space recreation master plan. One for beachfront development to consider historic access and parking, and that the city would accept offers to dedicate public access. And those are basically right out of Coastal Act type of provisions. And then 4 policies under the Parks, Recreation, Trails, and Coastal Access section, which is that new development avoid impacts to recreation, that any on shoreline provide public access, that they disallow the closure, that we disallow the closure of any city-owned coastal access, and that if we cannot maintain coastal access areas, that we offer them to another public agency. I didn't put them all in the slides. They are in the staff memo, but these are basically regular standard Coastal Act provisions, and we didn't see a real issue with them. Any questions on public facilities otherwise? I'll move on to, there was only one remaining item in healthy community because we moved a lot of the healthy community comments either to public facilities or other elements. And in fact, this one too, we're thinking based on how it's worded that this might be better placed in the open space element. Trails and public access ways are resource-dependent use that shall be allowed and encouraged within open space and within ESHA and ESHA buffers where sited and designed to protect ESHA against any significant disruption of habitat values. We're fine with this policy, but just think that maybe it belongs in open space. It didn't really seem like the healthy community type of policy as I had presented it earlier in the 2 different arenas. And then I think that brings us to coastal resiliency. There were a lot of coastal resiliency edits and comments, but most of them were just minor wording changes. They asked that we add more specific terms throughout the existing setting and general information to anywhere that we stated the words worst case scenario sea level rise or just general terms about sea level rise. They recommend that we put in specifically like 5 feet of sea level rise, and that we update table CR-3 with the local information that's included in Ocean Protection Council's guidance. They gave us a definition for major redevelopment, and I know that was something the public had also asked for. And they put it in the coastal resiliency element, but upon looking at it, it's purely just a definition. And so we told them we would like to place that in the glossary, and they said that would be fine. But an item for consideration is that it would be then using Coastal Commission's definition of redevelopment, which is that really long one that we pasted into the staff memo that talks about 51% change of the structure. They recommend that we add requirements for site-specific coastal hazard report, add a policy requiring the minimization of flood risk from sea level rise in development design, a policy that would require new development to have a condition on it regarding the shifting of the tidelands and where public lands may change with the shifting of tidelands, and that new development be required to have agreements or deed restrictions where land has known coastal hazards associated with it.
Can
that
I
they
ask,
may-
yeah, if you can clarify that a little bit, what does that mean in terms of people and their properties and deeds, and what does that look like?
So if a development comes in and we know that it's subject to coastal hazards and sea level rise, first and foremost with the policies, it will require that whatever development it is they're doing, most likely in our city, it would be some kind of redevelopment. It has to be resilient to flooding, but also regardless of how resilient it is in the long run, that they have to do a deed restriction or some kind of ongoing notice so that any future owners of the land or any stakeholders of the land have to understand that there is a coastal hazard risk and that they're basically proceeding at their own risk and it's their own liability and they cannot sue the city or the coastal commission.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Yeah, that's great, except every city attorney I ever talked to said you can't do that. You can't sign away your future need to sue the city. And I think that happened in La Conchita, maybe. I mean, to me, that is a powder keg over there, ready for death. But no, we're going to let everybody sign it away, and then finally the city capitulated. But I really thought the city attorney said we couldn't do that. I wish we could do that. I'm not against it. But have you had any feedback from them on this?
No, and we do need that. We need to work with the city attorney on that. Is that what you meant, our city attorney? Yeah.
Yes.
We need to work with them on how to best, if coastal commission's wording in the policy is the best. I agree with you that you can't make someone sign away their rights to sue, but I think you can at least say they understand that there are flooding risks and put that in the
And
deed
notify.
restriction.
That's very important, yes. But in the long run, it's the
Yeah,
judges that decide. So I think that should be just clarified.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that there's some really strong guidance from the Coastal Commission on this. I feel like it's time. And I think it will also certainly help decision makers as some of these really hard projects that come up in the residential beach area, things like that. It seems to me like we're moving into kind of less of a looking at mitigation strategies and more like an adaptation view, and that is huge. And so I'm really, really happy to see the work that continues to progress, because this is a big one. This is actually, all the elements are important, but this one is the heart and soul, the longevity of Carpinteria. So
Nicely said.
happy to see, really happy to see several pages of this. Really, yeah. You will continue to work with Coastal Commission, city attorneys.
Yes,
Great.
definitely.
Great.
And then there was one revision that I did pull out. It was objective CR1 that the objective that we monitor sea level rise and identify adaptation strategies and triggers based on, they had stated best available science and data, and then we further added, because best available science and data just seems so subjective, who decides what's best? So we added further, as recommended by the Ocean Protection Council and the state agencies at the time. That way, we are clearly calling out and citing what the state's guidance is before relying on it. So,
We call that belt and suspenders,
Yeah,
and I think that's a good idea.
And we need to, yeah, that's good. And also, we really need to define what major redevelopment is. And, or is that, wasn't there something about putting it into the glossary, or was that something else?
yes.
Okay.
They gave us the definition that they use, and we included that in the staff memo, but we're recommending that it do get put in the glossary, where that's our preference. And it's in the staff memo under, I think it starts on page 14.
Yeah, that, the definition is in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
it's-
seeing
it's
it
in- it's
when
in
I was
there.
reading it.
It's here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Starts on page 14, goes on to page 15. And so
Yeah,
that's
that's
what
right.
we intend to use.
Yeah. It's a little hard to figure out, but
Yeah.
we can do it. You
A
can
lot
do
of
it.
words.
And I believe that is the end of my highlights from Coastal Commission comments. And so willing to take any other questions you may have, or if there was anything that you saw in the memo that I didn't cover, we can certainly go over it. And then, of course, we want to allow time for public comment.
I just had a question about the Coastal Commission. Do they ever give cities money for parking or access or building that is appropriate for the beach? Do they ever do that, or they just tell us what to do?
That's a great question. I know that we do get grants from Coastal Commission, and the grants we've received were for things like doing the sea level rise adaptation, working on stronger policies and stronger analysis. But directly for parking or certain things like that, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'll have to find out and get back to you.
that's okay. We're not the favorite state in the union here.
I had a question. In terms of these edits, how does that impact the timeline for our approval for this process, for our update? Because I know there were a lot of comments, and a lot of them are really important to fold in. But how does that impact our timeline?
It's already doing it.
I know. How does it impact our timeline as it is already doing?
Yes, it has already delayed us compared to where we thought we would be. I thought that this month we would actually be doing the NOP and scoping meeting for the environmental impact report. So it's delaying us a bit. We're probably going to have to work through November with the consultants on making the changes and being able to resolve any remaining issues. And then the next step will be to launch that EIR process. So it's kind of hard to guess now when exactly that next step will occur. I would love for it to be in December, but then knowing that there's the holidays right in the middle too, it might get pushed right to January at the latest.
No, I appreciate that. I want to make sure the public understands some of the things that are causing the process to be longer than expected. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have one last sort of broad general question. It had to do with the healthy community element. When we move things from one element to another, particularly out of the healthy community element, and put it into, I think we are putting a couple into the public facilities and services, is that signaling potential funding strategies Is that part of the reason why, or is that not it at all?
That was not the intention, but thank you for bringing that up because we'll definitely want to look at that and make sure that we are not moving things in a way that incurs more cost than we had meant, right? So we want to make sure that if we're moving it to the public facilities, it makes sense and it's in line with what we were already trying to achieve and not adding costs that we didn't expect or that we're not considering funding strategies. So thank you for bringing that up. Ultimately, with the elements that we are bringing forward as part of the general plan update, they are interchangeable in the sense that nothing makes it stronger to be in one than another element. The only one that has its own considerations is the housing element, which is totally separate from this update. So, no, we hadn't considered that to answer your question, but I will look at it with that lens.
I thought that there was also a recommendation by Coastal Commission to move one of the earlier items into the safety element as well. So I started looking at it, and it seems to me like the public facilities service, the circulation element, and the safety element, that kind of anchors potential funding. So that's why I brought it up.
That is true. It helps us get grants if we can show that it is in our general plan, and then that it should be, especially if it's funding for safety from OES, for instance, that it's in our safety element. So that is important. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Anything else?
House in that picture.
Wow,
I know, it must be rich.
you are.
Beautiful picture.
All right, we'll open the public comment period. Do we have any slips?
There's a lot of money.
Okay, Ted Rhodes.
Good evening.
Welcome, Ted.
Ted Rhodes here. Is this on? Do you need this on? Test 1, 2. Oh, that's very nice. Yeah, I'm former president of the Citizens for the Carpinteria Bluffs. Patrick Crooks, our current president, couldn't be here tonight, so I'm speaking on behalf of Citizens for the Carpinteria Bluffs. And thanks for the good staff report. We agree with the Coastal Commission in the recognition of the environmentally sensitive habitat areas, for the entire Bluffs area, and we support reintroducing, I originally was going to say the new policies, but now I'm reminded they are policies we did have in there, but we're glad to have them back in there that Mindy mentioned. I think it doesn't hurt to hear a little bit of their text again, because I think it's extremely important that OSHA shall be protected against any significant disruption of habitat values, and only uses dependent upon these resources shall be allowed within these areas. And then the other one talked about protect, maintain, and where feasible, restore the biological productivity and quality of coastal waters, creeks, wetlands, estuaries, lakes, and marine resources. I think those are two really important things to have in here. We also support the Coastal Commission's addition of the new policies under the visual resources section on pages 7 and 8. I think that they were also discussed, but mentioned. But that being said, because the current ESHA overlay covers the entire Bluffs, any PUD uses will significantly disrupt the habitat values of the Bluffs. And as we wrote in our August 5th letter to you, we continue to support retaining the existing ESHA map that outlines the presence of multiple special status species that we listed in our letter earlier, and that utilize habitat and resources along the bluffs to sustain their dwindling populations. If the city and our community really wants to protect the ESHA, as people watching at home, that's the environmentally sensitive habitat areas of Bluff 0 and Bluffs 1, open space recreational land use designation, the OSR, makes the most sense. If you want compatibility with ESHA, you want OSR. And also, I think the community is getting really weary of having to come time and time again and reiterate that they want open space out on the bluffs. And one of the consultants for the project, the hotel project that came to Tea Time a few years ago, asked me, why doesn't the city rezone that so that people know, developers know that the real need by the community, the real vision of the community is open space. And so it also frustrates the developer. I know we can't switch in midstream here, but it's something to keep in mind, especially for the Chevron property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. All right, Susan Allen, please. Welcome, Susan.
I agree with Ted, and I'm sure I'm going to agree with almost everybody else. I understand that this is the city general plan, but my comments are focused on the bluffs from Chevron to Rincon Gateway. As I read the document, I could hear arguments between the public and the developers as projects come forward. Strong language will help prevent discord. The need for precise and detailed language is important in this document. From my experience, the drafters may believe that the intent is clear, but that is not always what happens, so precise language becomes important. The added blue language adds clarity. On a community level, should we be coming back through the document and tightening up any language? The increased use of the word shall as opposed to the word should, or should I say, shall be considered. And then my comments. Under the coastal access, safe and unobtrusive railroad crossings are not mentioned, a problem in Carpinteria. Under coastal hazards, should man-made hazards be included? And I'm thinking about abandoned oil wells and maybe some pipelines out there. Under coastal resources and in many other sections of this document, it increasingly brings up my concern on PUD, on Chevron property and the Tea Time property. PUD, in my opinion, creates issues when trying to enforce protections mentioned, such as view access, protection of resources, public view shed, scenic resources, and visual resources. And this is just kind of an aside, and I just wish we could somehow address this somewhere. The pier will probably be used for years, and lighting is a concern given the nearby seal habitat. Is there any means to correct that during lease negotiations? I know that's not on topic, but it's an issue, for me anyway. LU-1E and LU-3B, again, the strong language makes PUD designation difficult. CD-8-6A, CD-8-6D are protective of the bluff's open space, but again, does PUD designation make it more difficult to enforce in the long run? C-1XX, parking is already a difficult issue, and with new state laws regarding parking, this requirement makes it difficult to enforcement. What can be done on other levels? OS-2XX, again, makes it difficult to enforce with PUD designation at the Chevron property in Tea Time. OSC-11XS, same comment as above. 1A-5 and 6 are needed and welcomed. PF-XS, is Lagunitas Creek included? I'm concerned about recent plans to develop the vacant lot and S&S seeds. How is Dump Road going to be addressed, given that it is one of only 4 safe railroad crossings in the city limits? Providing lateral access shall be considered. The Coastal Bluffs Trail is a gem in our community, but if you can't easily access it, the public gets frustrated. LU-1E, again, concerned about PUD, I sound like a broken record, designation and enforcement. CR-4C, again, concerned about conflicts with PUD design designation. Enforcement, thank you, Jane, is going to be a challenge, and the city needs to think of ways to address that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. That's our last speaker slip. Anybody else from the public? Do we have anybody on Zoom?
We do have one raised hand on Zoom. Amrita, go ahead.
Good evening. I want to commend the staff. I think it's a much improved, document than it was a month ago. I wanted to make a few other comments. As far as the healthy community element, we worked on that a few years ago. And I remember Dave Derflinger really pushing that element. And I would hate to see all of the things that are in the community, healthy community development that focuses in on equity in particular, that all members of our community, whether they live in, low-income housing or on Padera Lane, that they have access to all of the things that Mindy mentioned earlier. In order for the city of Carpinteria to fulfill its mission statement, quote, the Community Development Department will provide proactive customer service to ensure that the physical development of the community enhances Carpinteria's small beach town character. In partnership with the community, we will promote a high quality of life by consistently and fairly enforcing regulations to preserve neighborhoods, achieve well-designed buildings, and contribute to a safe, healthy, livable, and economically prosperous environment. Working in partnership, that's the end of the quote. Working in partnership with the community implies that the desires of the residents who pay taxes are heard, respected, and relied on for their vision, insights, input, which results in the development of a more collaborative working relationship. A suggestion: include some residents on the CLUP GP committee as suggested at an earlier meeting. They could be chosen by their city council representatives. Documents such as the general plan must be enforceable. I totally agree with Susan Allen and Ted Rhodes about that. It has to be a very strong document. At the last CLUP GP meeting on September 15th, 2025, when residents requested a more enforceable document with more shells than shoulds, the staff stated that they wanted more flexibility rather than enforcement. This is not acceptable, in my opinion. I was relieved to find that the California Coastal Commission has understood the value of enforcement by changing should to shall on a number of the comments. The glossary additions done by CCC are well done. On page 2 of the CCC staff key comments, it clarifies the point about open space recreation land use and states, quote, it also identifies open space for long-term protection, end of quote. For decades, the residents of Carpinteria have expressed their desire to keep the bluffs open space. My questions are as follows. What specific regulations will be encouraged, enforced, and regulated to protect the bluffs from development? 2, why is PUD the designation used rather than OSR for the bluffs when it is obvious that the focus and efforts for decades has been the preservation of the bluffs as open space? That means no development. 3, if we have met our RENA goals and the City of Carpinteria's housing element has been certified by the state, which it has, why would we need to be having development on the bluffs? 4, where are the photos of mountains and public views that was brought up at the last meeting by one of the members? I was wondering where and when will we see the zoning map? Where are the diagrams and the overlays that will provide specific objective standards to guide our future of maintaining a small town community? And under the point that was discussed earlier in the meeting about site-specific visual evaluations, are there timelines when that is done by a developer or requested by the city staff? Is there some framework so that we can really be ensured that that happens each time? And where are the rezoning maps containing city-owned property as requested at the last meeting? I want to thank the City of Carpinteria and the California Coastal Commission for recognizing sea level rise having serious impacts and incorporating policies that will help protect the future of our community. It really looks hopeful. There's been so much rejection of the idea of sea level rise, like it's not going to happen for 100 years, but obviously it's going to happen sooner. And I was wondering if the staff could tell us how many written public comments they received in regard to tonight's meeting. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for all of your comments. Staff like to react to each one of those? Or the ones you can remember? That was a terrific list.
I can take a stab at a few of these. A lot of the things that came up at September's hearing, we are working on, so they're just, they'll be included in the next draft of the plan. The zoning maps, we continue to advocate to keep completely separate. So zoning changes can be done on their own. It's a much more changeable document to have zone changes and zoning maps, whereas a general plan is a much more difficult plan to change, and the maps are more difficult to change. So we do want to keep them separate, including overlays that go with zoning. However, we're always making those things accessible. We make sure it's very clear how to find those on our website, or anybody can ask for. The city-owned property, I'm not sure that, I don't know for sure that that should be in the general plan either. That's something that changes pretty frequently as we either buy or relinquish property, but we can make it also accessible to the public. We received 3 letters today on today's item and provided that to your committee. I hope that in the healthy communities element that we are striving to achieve that mission statement. And so that is a good reminder. And as we go back through, we really, again, want to make sure that the healthy community element and its goals are really clear and how they compare and contrast to the public facilities. I think that was it on the latest comments. I know a lot of the earlier comments this evening from the public were again about the the land use designations, and I want to reiterate for everyone that that is something that will get decided closer to the end of the process as to what those designations will be. But we want to make sure that we have a defensible environmental impact report that shows, again, the compare and contrast and the analysis, so that the proposed project is the the reasonably foreseeable quote unquote worst case scenario of the most development and the most build out. And that reduced alternatives show, well, what if we put open space designation on the Chevron property? What if we didn't convert the ag properties to development? And so that will be very clear in the environmental impact report. And then we welcome public input on those alternatives and on anything in between those alternatives as well. And that way we can bring forward a really good recommendation to the Planning Commission and City Council on what the final land use map should look like.
So on Bluffs Zero, also known as Chevron, what is staff thought about? What's the planning process going to be? How's that going to work? What are we going to do? And is there anything we can be doing in the general plan now regarding Bluff Zero that will help us in the future?
Other than the general plan is the higher level broad. It's not the zoning or the development standards. So it would, again, the PUD's designation would allow for a specific plan to be proposed there. It could be mixed use or residential, or it could be just some housing very close to the northern part of the property and open space on the southern part of the property. It's a flexible designation, but in the environmental impact report, we'll be able to say, what if this were developed? Here's the most impactive outcome. And then in reduced alternatives, what if it was kept open space or with some light recreation? I don't think there's anything else to put into the recipe of the general plan to steer what any kind of final development would be like. That's certainly a conversation we should keep having as we go along, and it could be built into the underlying zone or development standards if any kind of development is desired, or if only part of the property should be developed. That is something we want input on and can hear about. But for now, it's just super 30,000-foot level, very broad. One designation is to allow development, another designation wouldn't. So that's kind of how almost simplified it would be.
Okay.
About that, that is right. I mean, of course you're right, but the whole discussion of how that PUD or those land use issues can be, I can't even think right. I'm saying is the options are all going to be in the EIR. How much of this and how much of that, and with this and then that. It's not good to just say, oh, no, open space, that's it. Because a lot of people don't agree with that. I mean, I do, but that's not for the plan, I don't, because I think it should be more flexible. That EIR is where all this will come out. So we're not saying we're not going to do it. We're just saying this is where it is examined. It didn't come out very well, but you get my drift.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think that that's a really important point, is having the PUD does not preclude having open space for that parcel. It just means that, like you're saying, it sounds like if we were not to have a reduced use alternative, then that could potentially end up making the process much more difficult if we even want to get to open space designation. So I think that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction in terms of wanting to make sure that whatever direction we go in, that we have the most legally defensible and the most policy-driven way to get there, so that once we get there, whatever the will of the decision makers is at that part, whatever the will of the community is, that we we are able to arrive there in one piece without appeals, without, whatever other problems from the state might exist at that point. So I just thank you, Jane, for bringing that up, because I think that it's important for people to understand that PUD does not equal no open space. Those are separate. It's just trying to help us get to the point where we can choose either open space or some other version of it at some later time.
The other thing is we don't own that land. We can't just go, we want open space everywhere. I'm sorry, you have to go bankrupt. I mean, we have to deal with capitalism, as it were. So, yeah, it's true. So, I mean, it's a thought. It doesn't help us or guide us, but it's something to consider.
I think that the PUD designation on the bluffs, it remains fundamentally problematic. It's there. We've had lots of community input, generations worth. This was a subject at the last GPUC meeting, and we've heard from more people. I think it actually inhibits what we're trying to do with the general plan. So that's I'm still sticking with that here, but understand what the other perspectives are.
So I know this isn't part of the general plan, but going back to Bluff Zero, is there a way to have, instead of the city fathers and and Chevron getting together and figuring something out, is there a way to make this a public process, like, some sort of charrette or something anyway, before anything's decided, invite the public in to get input on what should happen there?
Good idea.
I mean, is that something that we might?
I would think that could happen in parallel with what we're doing. Like, I don't want to slow down. I need to get the general plan, the EIR started.
Since the subject came up tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that certainly could be recommended in parallel with what we're doing. There could be charrettes with Chevron at the table, the city at the table, and the community. And as far as I know, right now, they just got the green light to start their decommissioning, and I think that's all they're thinking about at the moment, if I were to speak for them.
Yeah. All right, anything else?
We did have one other Zoom speaker with a raised hand. I just wanted to give them another opportunity to raise their hand if they'd still like to speak. But I'm not seeing another raised hand.
Didn't officially close the public comment period, so.
All right, it doesn't look like there's any more raised hands on
Sorry,
Zoom.
missed them. All right, well, if there's nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.